Last week I put out a video talking about my basic thoughts on the movie Tolkien. And today I'm going to go into more depth and just talk about it. That was a very short, was supposed to be short. It was ended up being like 8 minutes long. But I'm going to go into a little more depth, actually talk about, because I really just in that video talked about like in a basic sense of I didn't like changes. But I didn't really go into details about what I'm talking about, where it changes, and not go into details about why I don't like these changes or anything like that. This video I'm going to be going into more depth and actually talking about like the very elements of what makes the movie good and what's wrong with it, stuff like that. This video is really going to be more into that element. Plus I'm also going to be talking more about what I really love about this movie, the messages behind the movie, and why I love them so much and stuff like that, and just talking about going over scenes, talking about spoilers, all that type of stuff for this movie. So just stay tuned, we're about to start that. But first, let me just explain a background behind my history with this movie. My history with this movie, as people who have been following this channel for a while may already know, because I talked about this in my video of the my top 10 favorite non-franchise movies that do not have like sequels and stuff like that to it, that are not cartoons. I mentioned how this movie was on that list. I put it as number 2. And I was talking about my relationship behind this movie. Big thing about my relationship behind this movie was, this movie came out in 2019. In the middle of 2019, I started writing a speech because I was in high school. I was in this speech and debate club making speeches. And so I was making a speech about the life of Tolkien. And I was talking about, I had 10 minutes to talk about the life of Tolkien and talk about what you can learn from him. In that one, I was using a lesson of persevering and just keep going and don't get too pressured into just finishing your books too quickly and doing stuff like that. And just choose, take your time to, and don't feel too pressured into just doing stuff way too quickly and persevering through hardships. Because he really went through some really hard times. And so that was mainly the topic of that video. Again, I'm going to, eventually I'm thinking about it on my personal channel, which I don't really post any videos on that, but eventually maybe, when this channel starts growing more, one thing I might try to do is put out a video where I literally read off that script of the speech I gave when I was like 16 years old for a speech tournament I went to and wrote the speech. And so I read a bunch of books on Tolkien and all, and the life of him, so for that speech. And I would love to be able to give that speech to you guys, and maybe even give some other speeches I wrote back in those days too, on my personal channel. So we'll look out to see if that happens sometime in the future. Anyway, so I wrote that speech, and around the time I was writing that speech was when they first started marketing. They're coming out with a movie about Tolkien, and it was really cool. I saw the trailer, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to watch this movie. And it came, and I knew it came out, and I was just like, I was on hectic with. I had speeches to write, I had schoolwork to do, all this type of stuff, and I was just running hectic, and so couldn't get to it. That's when it came to the moment that this was 2019, I was given the speeches, I wrote the speech in 2019, and I was given it at tournaments in February of 2020 and March of 2020. I was going to give one in, of course, April, and also there was another tournament in May. But for anyone who knows what happened in 2020, which everyone should know, if anyone's watching this like way far into the future, and somehow the COVID-19 pandemic is like a part of your history books, I guess take this as a history lesson. In March, for us here in Ohio, it was the day of the 15th that when the big shutdown happened. So I had a tournament on, I believe it was the 11th and 12th. So I just finished this tournament. I had just got done giving this speech, and suddenly, a couple days later, I was like, I did really well with the speech. I didn't get any awards, but I was like, I think it was like one place away from getting into the final round with that speech. So I was like hyped with the speech. I loved making the speech, and now I was doing really well, and people were like, my judges were really liking the speech, and I was like, yes, I'm going to do well with the speech. And that's when it happened, that the shutdown happened. A couple days after that, I had been like so hyped for this, and the shutdown happened. And suddenly I was stuck at home, and all those tournaments are canceled. I had no more tournaments for the rest of the year, and now I just put all this work into making this speech. I had another speech, which was a Bible interp where I was doing David and Goliath, the story of David and Goliath from the Bible. And both of those speeches, I had put a bunch of work into preparing and making sure they were perfect. And with both of those speeches, I was doing pretty well. And I was probably the next tournament, we're probably going to hopefully be able to get into the final round. So it was really annoying when the shutdown happened and suddenly I was stuck at home. Anyways, what brings this all together is then I was stuck at home now, and I was like, it was annoying that I couldn't finish giving the speeches at these tournaments and all. And suddenly I realized I had time on my hands now. And yeah, I was still doing schoolwork and all. And it was my senior year, I believe. And I'm like, okay, but I have some time on my hands now. So I'm going to look up that movie now. And I looked it up and watched it. And I was like, you mean coming straight off of writing a speech, giving a speech, really like trying to work on understanding Tolkien, was really like watching that movie. And I was just like, this movie's amazing. This movie really like took the character of Tolkien and really like flew with him and like really like did a good job making a good story off of him. So that's what's going into this, like my review of this movie is that I was just like, this movie brings back like some painful memories, but also some like really like good memories of just like remembering like, yeah, when I gave that speech, I had a lot of fun with the speech, and I just wish I had been able to do the speech more. But I really appreciate how well they do with this movie, with honoring the life of Tolkien. And as someone who had to do a bunch of research on him, I really appreciate that. Anyway, so let's just jump in. Hopefully that was not too long of an intro for you guys, so you guys, like, most of you guys cut away. Some people might have just literally just skipped past that, because I will leave. I did leave in the comment section below my time cards, so that you guys can skip past stuff you guys don't care to see, like that long intro of just talking about my history behind this movie. Anyway, so let's just jump in and just talk about my thoughts about this movie in more depth. So yeah, some problems with this movie, some good and some bad. This is not going to be a video talking about every single change they made to the in this movie to the life of Tolkien, but I'm going to just talk about some good stuff and some bad stuff. Starting out with one that really comes to mind that's a really good thing in my mind, but it's also, it's definitely a difference from the actual story of Tolkien, but I think it's a good change, and that is the de-aging of Edith. For those who know the story of Tolkien, when he first met her, he was 14 and she was 19. So while they had this friendship, while Tolkien was in school and all, so they knew each other from being housemates, and they started up a real friendship, and they would start going on picnics together. They would go to tea shops, and then as they actually have a scene in the movie showing this, where they would take the sugar cubes and toss them down onto the hats of the fancy women and all. And a really funny thing, and I love it how they put that in the movie. And so they were just troublemakers together and having a lot of fun. And so, but the whole thing was that she wasn't Catholic. His guardian, his uncle, was just like, okay, you're not getting your studies done properly, and she's not even Catholic. You need to take a break from her. You need to stay away from her. She's been a bad experience. So that's why he had to for years wait from her. And then years later, he ran into her again, and they caught up their friendship. She was already engaged to someone else. And a really cool fact about that's a big change from the movie that I actually don't like. I'll get into later talking about that. But that her fiance saw them hanging out together and was just like, yeah, no, I'm gonna step aside. Clearly you two are supposed to be. It's a very sweet little thing. Anyways, so the point is that I think that was one of the best changes they made, was that they did de-age her, so she was closer to his age. So it wasn't as weird as the whole first part where you see them hanging out. It was not 14-year-old and a 19-year-old. It was closer in age. A little thing about the Lord of the Rings. Both Beren and Luthien and Aragorn and Arwen are both, in those cases, the woman is older. In those cases, a couple thousand years older. something like that. But of course, with Tolkien's case, that would not be the case. But he always, like, those people were supposed to represent his wife and all. I believe he even had the name Tenuvio written on her gravestone because, like, she was his Luthien and all. And it's a really cool thing. Like, both Arwen and Tenuvio are based off of for the person of Edith, his wife. Really cool thing, and I really liked how they did de-age it, so it wasn't as weird. On to that same point, they did change, and this is not a change I'd like. They changed it so instead of him, he saw her again right before he went off to war. And I don't like that because in the real story, in real life, he met her before he went to war. They had already got married, and then he went off to war. I do understand that this was for the fact that this was a movie, and because it was a movie, they wanted to, really add the drama to it. So it's like, oh, will they actually end up together? It's like, there's no point. Movies, a lot of times they do that. I see it's pointless to do stuff like that because the fact of the matter is, yes, we all know that we're going to end up together. For anyone who had known anything about Tolkien, they would know that he got married to Edith. They would have known this stuff. It's also just like they would have set it up. They would have set up a different woman for him. They would have probably taken out the whole thing about Edith later on, just because they would have been like, oh, it would have been a little bit of a cringy thing to have it, so she was so far into it, and then he never got married to her. So everyone knew that he was going to do it, so he was going to get married to her, so I don't know why they pushed so hard to be like, will they, won't they, at the end point. But yeah, no, the problem is with this, it was with the whole change of just making this the one married, is that it felt like it was too Hollywood adding in, we can't have it so they just get married, but I don't know why, because it would have been a better choice if they did that, and there was nothing changed in the end with later on in the story that would, make a difference with that. Like, you could have just had it so when he woke up in the hospital, instead of making it so it was this girl that he liked, it was his wife at his bedside. So it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. Another change that I didn't really like was the change they did with the character, with the moment where Tolkien saw Smith on the battlefield right before he dies, but it's also not fully confirmed that he actually saw him. It was more might have been his just imagination and all. But in real life, what happened was he got a letter saying that both of his friends from the TCBS had died. He got letters confirming this, and they just, again, another thing that added to the movie aspects of it. They just says, oh, it'd be a lot cool if he had an action scene where he goes onto the battlefield and all. It's supposed to somewhat. I think it was supposed to show look the terrifyingness, the horrors of the Great War, what happened during this, being able to see it. But the fact of the matter is, for the most of the war, he was down with trench fever, and he did fight in the war, but it was they couldn't have had him so he was just laying in bed or anything like that. They had to throw him out in the field so he could see for himself. It was yeah, they were trying to show the war, but honestly, the war was a big part of what happened, and he you see it in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. You really see his experience with the war and how it draws him in. But I genuinely think they needed that in there. It was kind of just, there's some parts of this that's just, when they try to make it too movie-like, I was just but that's not accurate to the character of Tolkien. I don't know why you did that. So that was just some changes that were just there's been plenty more. You'll probably find plenty of other videos. Again, maybe one day I'll put out a video of the top 10 changes they made to the Tolkien movie from, ones I hate to ones I actually approve of. Different stuff like that. So I'll eventually put out a video like that. As I mentioned in my shorter video, I, as a Tolkien fan, when they follow the rule, they follow what Tolkien wrote, especially when it comes to the Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. But also as someone who's fascinated with screenwriting, and I won't say I'm the most expert on all screenwriting stuff, but I do have that mindset. I was just that's something I naturally understand a little bit more than some people, is how screenwriting works. It's just in schooling, writing literature, stuff like that, I just clinged on to, just like how people who are naturally gifted with math. It's not that they would like have this skill that they just know every math thing, but it's just they pick up math way quicker. They pick up math like, boom. Just the same way I understand how this screenwriting stuff works based off of just hearing this stuff and like just being able to put stuff together myself. But I understand why they would make changes, like some of these changes. My mom, on the other hand, she's also a Tolkien fan, but she like, oh, this change was bad, this change was bad, this change was bad. I'm like, yeah, like, again, the big argument of why did they take Tom Bombadil out of the Lord of the Rings? Well, it's because when you really look at it, the story, they were trying to, with that movie, it didn't fit in with the movie that well. The suspense in those moments would have been broken if you randomly had a couple chapters, or like, for that case, a half an hour of hanging out with Tom Bombadil. But if you did like a movie, like a TV series out of the Lord of the Rings, you could have a couple episodes dedicated to Tom Bombadil and not have a problem. But the fact of the matter is they need to keep it going, and it would have made, like, instead of having it so they get away from Nazgûls and then they had to go into the to Bree, instead they would have made it so it was like, they escape from the Nazgûls, they would have gone to Tom Bombadil, then they would have, like, then they would go to Bree, and it would have been a long, weird break that would have made way more sense if it just went straight to Bree instead. It makes way more sense that way. So that's why I actually approve of that changes, and some other changes. Now there are changes like, what they did with Faramir that makes no sense, that, like, it added time on, it was pointless, and it really, like, took away from the character of Faramir. But that's a completely different topic we are not getting into in this video. Anyways, but the point is that I do agree with some changes they make in movies because I understand that it is a movie adaptation of something. And so you have to make some changes to make it more movie-like. So the next thing is, in the beginning of the movie, I talked about this in my shorter video. The big message of this story is all dealing with friendship and stuff like that. And the beginning of the movie doesn't really fit in with that as much, especially when it comes to, I didn't really like the actress they got to play his mother. For one thing, I believe his mother was supposed to have like dark hair like him. And for some reason they gave his mother red hair instead. I don't know why they did that. It just, the actress they also got just felt a little bit like cheesy, like the way she acted was just like, I don't know. I didn't come off right, and you really didn't feel connection between Tolkien and his mother and people and his little brother and all that kind of stuff. It just didn't feel the same. Another scene that's just, I don't know why, but they had it in the end of the movie. Edith and Tolkien is talking on the step of their house, and she's just like, you used to make these, write these stories for fun. Why, like, either you give it up or you find a way to make it, like, figure out where you're going with this, and like, kind of like angry at him about this. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like something she would have said. I don't know what I think about that scene, because it was just like one of those things where it was just like out of place. It felt a little weird. I didn't really like it because it was just like, why? That doesn't seem like something that Edith would say. Why are they adding this drama in? Again, anyways, so that's some stuff I don't like about it. Now onto some stuff I really, really like about this. For one thing, visuals. This visually is wonderful. It's stunning with some of its, like, it has really cool moments where you see, like, in World War I, you see, like, how he gets some of his ideas of the Black Riders and all, based off of, like, seeing the enemy riding on their horses. You see, like, the smoke and the fire coming up from the enemies and all enemies and all, like from cannons and stuff like that, that just like forms into a dragon and all, and you see like all the stuff that like gives this like, oh, this is like somewhat, it's supposed to like, yeah, wow, he didn't fully get all his ideas from the war and all. It was really interesting the way, like, yeah, I was trying to show that, yeah, he got some of his ideas. He was like, the war that helped shape the stories of the Lord of the Rings and, Middle Earth, because of, just seeing the war. You see how it works. It's really nice. I really like that. So overall, the visuals, even when it wasn't doing scenes like, in the war and stuff like that, it was just like, it was a bright movie, a bright, colorful movie. It wasn't trying to be too dark and gritty all the time. It had some like color to it, and it's like, it was a fun, like, it was pleasing to look at. It wasn't really like dark and gritty. I like that. It had some great music in it. I won't say that the music is something that like I always go back and rewatch, re-listen to all the music, but I will say that I do like the music. I think the music is good. It was just not like thrown at. It wasn't like really like making me like really want to go listen to it again. But I remember the music being really, really good. The stories and the messaging in this movie is just, again, you mean with the story, they're just like when you kind of can say, yeah, to Peter Jackson, like, great job with the Lord of the Rings, great job making a great story. But the fact of the matter is, he didn't really make the story, he just adapted the story. Same with this, they took, well, I think, and you can disagree with me on this, but I think it's harder to, make, and it's more creative when you take the story of someone's life and have to make it into a movie versus just adapting a book, because The Lord of the Rings has a clear out story. Tolkien's life is the life of a man. That's the story. But you have to pull together a story based off of that. One of the big messages in this story is that of friendship. Just like how when I wrote that speech, the big message I was trying to get across is, persevering and not giving up on your dreams and stuff like that. And those lessons I took based on that lesson, I had to write that speech with saying, so let's go through Tolkien's life from the beginning, his middle of, from the war, and to the end of his life, and see how that shapes this man, how it shapes the stories he writes, but the big thing is, from a very young age, he kept having to move around. He wasn't able to, properly be, settled in one spot for a long time in his life. He wasn't really settling down somewhere until he was 14 or something. He kept moving around all the time from age 2 on. He was just bouncing from house to house, from place to place, because his mother kept having moving all. His dad died when he was 2 years old or something, and thus he wasn't able to really get to know his dad that much. It was all this different stuff that was and his mom died when he was 12. It was so he had a really hard life, childhood, and now we all know, if you clicked on this video about a movie based off of Tolkien, you probably know what The Lord of the Rings is. So I can say, we all know what The Lord of the Rings is. We all know where he ended up. And that's a whole story. What my speech was about was talking about the evolution of this man, how this man who had such a hard life was able to bounce back and write these incredible stories. Just like that, the message in this one is all about friendship, and the friendships you grow, and the brotherhood you bring along the way. And when you lose some of them, you learn to bond somewhat, but you also just learn that to allow their legacies to live on through you, as he does at the end of the movie, where he says to one of his friends' mothers, hey, I would love to write I would like to publish some of his works, because he was a really, really good poet. And he begged his friend's mother to allow him to do this, because he wanted his friend's legacy to live on. He wanted his friend to be the world to be able to see what his friend had been able to do, and not allow his friend to be another victim of the war. So that's one of the biggest things, and so that's what I'm talking about. Where with The Lord of the Rings, right? There's a clear message. You can get any message you want from it. Just like how, again, I will talk a lot of videos talking about Troy, the movie Troy. A lot of videos talking about this and all different stuff like that. But again, with Troy, it's the same way with the whole thing of that the Iliad is a story of the anger of Achilles. The story of Troy, the movie, is this story, the big message of it is how you need to do stuff with your life. You have to, if you want to be remembered, you have to, take those steps. You have to take those risks. Go to the war. Even that Achilles knew that by going to the war, he was going to die. He still was I would rather have that glory than live a happy life at home, have a wife, have kids, all that kind of stuff, and never have my name carved into stone. So just like that, the Iliad so that you can take stuff like that and bring a deeper message out of it. But for the most part, stuff like, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings was just an accurate story of the Lord of the Rings, and it kept the same messages of the Lord of the Rings from Tolkien's books in the movie. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you're dealing with the life of someone's story, the life of someone, you make your own story based off of it, not that you change up, but you're saying, like, I'm going to show these certain scenes of his life because it furthers along the message I'm trying to give. So I really like that message that of, like, holding on, like, don't allow your friends' legacies to die. Like, friendship is something you should learn from, and, like, brotherhood is a good thing. There's also the whole thing of him and just, like, holding on to love and, not giving up when everything seemed hopeless with him. Almost getting dropped out of college when he found the letter. It was like they made it so it was kind of not accurate to what happened probably in real life, but I really liked what they did with making it so it was like the same week. He was going to get kicked out of college. The same week he gets a letter saying, hey, Edith is engaged. So his life is just a living hell now. He's going to get pulled out of college, something he really, really loved. He's not able to do, and he's going to be, like, kicked out, and he's, like, the love of his life, the person he was going to be like, once I'm 21, I'm going to go find her, and I'm going to ask for her hand. He wasn't able to do that because of the reason that now she was engaged. So his life was, like, back going downhill, but that very night, this professor heard him speaking into this made-up language that they created, and the professor the next morning talked to him about it, and he's just realized that maybe he wants to just switch majors and do something that he was always passionate from a very young age, talking about, like, dealing with languages and all. I really love that. I really love it how they showed, like, yeah, and then he took that lowest point of his life, one of the lowest points in his life, and he made it one of the highest points. Another one was when his mother died and he had to go off to boarding school. Right, that was probably really low. He went to a boarding school where he had no friends. Suddenly, but he managed to make these friends with these 4 boys, and they became the closest bunch ever. Later on in life, he has the inklings. You take these moments of, like, low points, and he found ways to go up again. That's some big lessons you can learn from the life of Tolkien and all. And I really like it how in this movie they have it so that he doesn't, like, don't give up. While somewhat the message that his friend gives right after he figures out that Edith is engaged, the message that his, like, friend gives him, and it's like, oh, well, isn't that the best type of love? The love that you still love them even that they're never going to be able to give that back to you and all. And I'm like, oh yeah, like, that's a cool message, but at the same point, maybe you should help him get over this, because the fact of the matter is, yeah, the love of his life is getting married to someone else. Maybe you should be like, okay, let's help you move on. But I just thought that was kind of funny, that whole moment. I'm like, that's a cool moment. But wait a second. That's a terrible thing to tell him in that moment. Like, even that, like, it's kind of what he wanted to hear, probably. But in the moment, he needed to, not in that very moment, but he needed that friend to be, like, more like, snap out of this. You need to, like, not move on right away, but you need to, she's getting married to someone else. Move on. You need to eventually find someone else. But on the topic, the love story in this, I think they really, like, wow, you would really have to make it a whole TV show to literally show every single moment of his life growing up there and all. So they took out a lot of scenes of him and Edith. You saw them with with spoons just eating jam. That's actually something that they did in real life. Of course, as I mentioned before, the whole thing about throwing the sugar cubes onto the hats of the wealthy women and all. That's something they would do all the time. They would go to tea shops and do that. They would just sneak out of the windows and go visit each other and just hang out in trees, do some stuff like that. It was like, that was just, they were troublemakers. You have to, a lot of people don't think about this, but yeah, Tolkien was a troublemaker. He was a very goofy type guy. and I find that absolutely hilarious, as I mentioned before. But yeah, this movie is really, really funny. This movie has some hilarious jokes. Last time I was watching it 2 weekends ago, I didn't notice that I wasn't laughing as much, but the fact of the matter is, the first couple times I was watching it, when I was watching with my family and stuff like that, I was like, this is, like, the whole point where it's just, like, not like a silly, and not a, like, you mean, cheesy type humor, or, like, you mean, a, like, bad humor, but, like, a small kind of funny humor of the whole thing of, like, the whole thing with the stick. For those who have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about with the whole thing where it's just, like, they're using a stick as an analogy, and one of the friends is just, like, keep trying to bring back the stick, and those, like, just drop the stick. The stick was an analogy, just drop it. Or the whole thing with, oh, Herheimer, and stuff like that, like, all these, like, jokes that go through the movie, it's kind of funny. But yeah, so the movie has some funny moments in it. I will say that the last time I was watching it, I didn't laugh as much as I did at some the first couple times, because it was just, like, I already knew all the jokes was coming, and so I guess that is a negative, you could say, is that it is one of those movies that doesn't get old with everything else, but I felt like the jokes weren't, like, not funny anymore. They were just not cracking up type funny anymore. So, yeah, another thing is, like, I mean, the casting. The casting in this movie is well put together. I really, really, really like how well they, like, cast all these characters. They, for the most part, every casting they got, besides, of course, I think Tolkien's mother, were pretty well cast. They acted, and they just seemed like pretty much the right people to place in this. So the casting's really good. Even when it doesn't go for the people on screen, but just the directors, the writers, the cinematographers, all those people, the makeup, the costume designers, all those people did a really good job with this movie. It's well put together. I really appreciate that, like, especially, like, when it comes to the writers and director. Really did a good job with this movie, just honoring Tolkien and saying, yeah, this is the life of Tolkien. We are going to honor the life of Tolkien. And I really like that. I liked how they respected the source material. They respected Tolkien in this movie. Even with the changes they made to this movie, I'm like, I see why they made them. I just don't like them. So, again, for anyone who's a Tolkien fan, the messages in this, the messages of friendship, all that stuff is are really, really good. I really, really like this movie when it comes to that it was accurate to Tolkien and the life of Tolkien for the most part, and the changes they made worked for the most part. I just didn't like some of them. So if you're a Tolkien fan, watch this movie. You'll probably love it. If you're not a Tolkien fan, still watch it, because this is a really, really good movie, and maybe you learn more about Tolkien, and maybe suddenly be able to go back to read Lord of the Rings, watch Lord of the Rings and stuff, and have a new appreciation for the Lord of the Rings. I do know some people who probably never going to like the Lord of the Rings, and I think it's really sad, because the Lord of the Rings, in my mind, is the greatest fantasy story ever written. And even that I hope to one day be able to write my fantasy stories, I guess this is a bad thing to go into as a fantasy writer to say, but they're never going to be as good, in my mind, as Lord of the Rings, because they're not the Lord of the Rings. And so the point is, yeah, guys, please watch this movie, because I really liked it. As I said in my last video, I'd give it a 15 out of 15 thumbs up. I don't know how you would rank it again, but just for 5 stars, probably like 98 on Rotten Tomatoes, or that would be fresh. And yeah, I really, really, really liked this movie. I thought it was really, really good. And I strongly recommend you guys check it out, because the music, the visuals, everything about this movie, I loved it. The messages, and as I mentioned in those videos before, just talking about this in shorter, is that this movie, every single time I watch it, I get hyped to write more of my stories, do more with writing fantasy, and try the right languages, because it's a movie that just hypes, especially a writer. Watch it for the hype. It just hypes you up and makes you want to, write more, because it does such a great job with the story of just saying, yeah, the life of this writer was awesome. He went through some hard troubles and all, but I just love it. I thought they did a really great job, and it brings some great memories back whenever I watch this movie, because it's really, really good. And I personally own this movie. And I will leave a link in the description so you can buy this movie too, because this movie is awesome. This movie is so good. I can't say enough about this. This movie is awesome. I love it. Anyways, guys, so if you guys haven't yet, please subscribe. This has been the Movie Night Reviewer. Peter Wary, signing off.